Hello again. I've spoken before of my dislike of multiculturalism, which is sometimes described as a society forming a cultural mosaic or salad bowl. That is to say, every community of immigrants having its own customs and traditions rather than conforming to that of the host country. Some people have interpreted this to mean that I am wholly opposed to immigration or that I'm racially prejudiced. Neither of these things are true. I certainly favour controls on immigration, and I also think that assimilation is a better prospect for harmony in the future than multiculturalism. I thought that today I would explain how assimilation works for immigrants, because those of us who remember the 1950s will have a few good examples of this to draw upon. In the years following the end of the Second World War, there were many Polish people in Britain, usually those who had been supporters of the government in exile. They dared not return to their country once the Russians had installed a puppet government there. They preferred to remain in Britain. At the school I attended in East London at that time, there were quite a few Poles. I can still remember their names: Marcelo Andruszkiewicz, Rochelle Zielinski, Irving Chekovich. The early episodes of Coronation Street in the 1960s featured some of these Polish refugees actually as characters. Elsie Tanner's daughter Linda married one such, Ivan Chevesky. These families did their damnedest to fit into British society and conform to the rules and traditions of the country. They did not demand that the schools their children attended should start serving Polish food, nor did they complain about prejudice or insist on speaking Polish all the time or living in Polish-speaking ghettos. There was no Polish community as such. There weren't groups of Polish people huddled together in big cities. There were no Polish areas. Instead, these people spread out throughout the country. This didn't mean that they abandoned their family histories. They remained Catholic for the most part. They spoke Polish in their homes and so on, and they preserved the memory of their homeland. But this was a private matter, and by the second or third generation, these people were indistinguishable from any other British person. Their origins were their own business, but they insisted on becoming part of society, not huddling together in separate communities. One thinks also of Indian Hindus and also Jews. They preserve their own traditions about food, diet and other things, but they don't seek to make a fetish of them. You won't hear of campaigns to have kitchens in schools and council offices serve only kosher food or to stop serving beef in case it upsets Hindus. I mention this because, of course, the dictates of multiculturalism require that none of our children at very many schools in this country should ever be offered bacon or pork, lest one particular community should be offended. Nobody objects to Jews observing their religion or Hindus praying to their own gods any more than we mind what they choose to eat at home. I cannot recall the last time that I met a Hindu who required an interpreter or a Jew who tried to impose his religious demands upon others. These two groups have become assimilated into British society. They keep their own customs in private, but conform to society conventions outside. Some groups of immigrants refuse to assimilate, and they are encouraged in this by official policies which endorse separate communities, which I happen to regard as a disaster for the cohesion of society. When attempts are made to assimilate them into society, they resist. We saw a recent example of this with Afghan refugees who had not been in Britain more than a few weeks before they began to cut up rough about the idea of settling into the country and mixing with everybody else. In the description to this video, I give a link to an item from the BBC website. After a few weeks of staying in hotels at the expense of British taxpayers, some of the Afghan refugees are now growing restless. According to the report, they are concerned that the Home Office scheme they are currently part of could see them move to anywhere in the UK and away from family and friends. We learn also that, Councillor Peymana Assad, also an Afghan refugee, said the applications were putting pressure on the council, which has very little housing stock available. Ms Assad said that she believes the problem's going to get worse. We have such a large Afghan community already. We understand we're going to have more cases come to us with families leaving hotels. We need the Home Office to communicate with Afghan refugees to give them clarity as to how the process is actually going to work. And there it is, the problem when we abandon ideas of assimilation. We are told about the Afghan community. Leave aside for a moment the breathtaking cheek of turning up in a foreign country and after being put up all expensive faded hotels, complaining how slow the government is to give you your own house. We find that they don't want any old house. In other words, they don't want a house among British people. The idea is that these refugees will be dispersed across the country, so that Afghan refugees might find themselves living in the West Country, the north of England, Wales, anywhere at all. They don't want a house amongst British people, which would enable them to assimilate to the prevailing culture more rapidly. They want to stay near their families and friends so that they can be part of a separate community. This illustrates perfectly the difference in approach between assimilation and multiculturalism. Tomorrow I shall talk about multiculturalism and why I feel that this policy is storing up serious problems for the future.